evening. Welcome back to 2018 Open Conference, Pet Behavior Science. With me is Dr. Sylvia Manson, who is a doctor in veterinary medicine. In 2005, she founded her own clinic near Grenoble in France, and in 2016, she obtained a French diploma in veterinary psychiatry, and she started the residency of the European College of Animal Welfare and Behavioral Medicine. She has now dedicated her practice to behavioral medicine, and she is consulting both in her clinic and in Paris in the Veterinary Hospital of Regis. She is a board member of SOPSI, a French association promoting veterinary psychiatry, and a member of the European Society of Clinical Veterinary Ethology. Welcome, Sylvia. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, David, for this kind introduction. Can you hear me fine? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So let's start with our topic, which is to shock or not to shock. So here is the plan we are going to follow. First of all, I wanted to take a few minutes to explain to everyone why I got this personal interest in this topic. Actually, it started like 10 years ago in my general practice, where I had a few customers bringing me back stories about shock collars, and that's when I started to get interest in the topic. First dog that I'm going to talk to you about is Cézanne. Cézanne was 10 years old female Yorkshire, and the owner had complaints from the neighbor because she was barking a lot in the garden. So she decided to use this on Cézanne, no bark collar. She bought it at the store just close to her house. And she was perfectly happy with it because she tried it actually once, and Cézanne got shocked. She came back very fast into the house, and she never barked again. Now we have Eagle, and with Eagle it's a different story. He was around 1 year old when it started. He was attacking every dog he was meeting, and he had already wounded several of them. So the owners decided to get advice from the breeder of Eagle. The breeder was someone very known in hunting practice, so they sent Eagle back to him for a special training. And we don't exactly know what happened there. We know he used shock collar. He used this one, so that's the remote controlled collar. And Eagle came back after like 2 weeks of training. And indeed, I could see that he was not attacking dogs anymore. When I saw him back from the breeder, he would just get very inhibited, like he would freeze when he was seeing a dog. He would even pee under himself. But he was not attacking them anymore. The third dog is Sophia. Sophia was living in a huge garden. It was so huge that the owners wouldn't be able to get just a regular fence. So they were using this collar, the electronic boundary fence one, for all their dogs for like 20 years. And they were very happy with it because all their dogs had been trained with that, and they never had issues using this kind of collar. So now, if we have been able to ask the owner's point of view about those collars, they would all have said something like, it's awesome, it solved all of our problems, they couldn't live outside otherwise, it changed our life in a very positive way, and they would have recommended it without a thought. Now that's only the owner's point of view, and if it's so magic, I would say why not? If in one shock you can solve everything, I started to ask myself, well, if it's so magic, why not? But the true story and what I could see really was that for Cézanne, she died at 14. And like I said, she never barked again. That's really true. The thing is, she never put a paw outside again either. So once she got shocked, she went inside the house and she never wanted to go outside again. She ended her life inside the house. And I would say it's just learned helplessness with a very acute depression state. For Hegel, he died before his 4th birthday. He never attacked a dog again until he killed one. Once he was able to go outside his garden and he attacked the neighbor's dog, and the owners decided to euthanize him when this happened. Now for Sophia, she died at 7 years old. She stayed inside the invisible fence until she got scared by fireworks, and that's on the National Day in France. And she went outside. She took the shock, and she was found like 7 days after. We suppose she got hit by a car or something like that, but she was found dead already. So that was just the introduction, and now I'm going to talk to you about the ESVC position statement that I had the chance to work with a few colleagues. It's based on the work of the shock collar working group. We worked over a year on this group, and we had a few aims. One of them was to review the pro and contra of the use of e-collars, gathering scientific evidence. And we wanted to establish a position statement regarding e-collars, which was done in 2017. We even were able to make this paper this year to establish what we had gathered in the position statement. So just we are all on the same track about positive punishments. David, if you can please put the video.
What's this about a shock collar?
Ah, yes, we'll explain. Miss Garvey has many attractive friends who will come to visit.
May I offer you some goat cheese puff pastries I made, mistress?
As long as you can do it quietly.
So that's positive punishment. If we go back to operant conditioning, I'm sure everybody already knows that, but I just want to make sure we are talking about the same things. So we have reinforcement, of course, which will always increase the probability of apparition of a behavior. Of course, we have positive reinforcement, which goes with apparition of a stimulus, and negative reinforcement, which goes with the removal of a stimulus. Then we have punishment, which will lower the probability of apparition of a behavior. And again, it can be positive punishment or negative punishment. Now, if you look at the green parts, that's what is called positive or non-aversive methods. And for the orange ones, you have aversive methods. So when we are talking about shock collars, it's mainly about positive punishments, and some people will tell you that shock collar can be used as negative reinforcement, but we'll come back on that later, and it's not so easily used this way. Now, that's the same thing, but in a more funny way.
You're here a lot now.
Am I talking too much? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chocolate?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Okay.
I know what you're doing.
I know what you're doing.
Really?
Really?
Yes.
Yes.
You're using chocolates as positive reinforcement for what you consider correct behavior.
Very good.
Very good.
Chocolate?
No. This has to stop now.
Stop now.
Are you saying that I am forbidden from applying a harmless, scientifically valid protocol that will make our lives better?
Yes.
Yes.
You're forbidden.
You're forbidden.
Bad, Leonard. If you let me use negative reinforcement, I can get done before we go to bed.
You're not squirting her in the face with water.
No, of course not. We're talking very mild electric shocks. No tissue damage whatsoever.
So that was just for the joke, but I think it explains things very well. Now, what we started to do in the working group was to gather the pro for using electric color. So here is what people will tell you. You can have an effect that is aversive enough to suppress an undesired behavior. It's quite low cost. You can solve behavioral issues that no other technique can. The intensity is controllable. The dog can learn alternate behavior if used as negative reinforcer. And finally, you have a smaller risk to the long-term welfare. Often they would say compared to other aversive methods, because one of the arguments is to say you just shock the dog once and everything is solved. So I did put on the side the pro, and we are going to see what we can find as arguments. I have put a lot of references and papers. I won't name them each time, but you can have them in the text. And it's just so you have the references if you need them. So the first point is about shock intensity, because as you can see, pro people will tell you that the intensity is controllable, but is it really controllable? If the intensity is too strong, what we can have anyway is that it can induce learned helplessness. It can induce heavy pain, physical wounds, and aggression. So you can also have an emotional response that can interfere with the ability to learn. And it can even lead to desensitization if the dog motivation is too strong, and then you will end with behavioral intensification. So you use the collar to have your dog stop barking, and you have a dog that is able to bark even more, even when he's getting shocked. Now, if the intensity is too low, what will happen is that you will need to use stronger and stronger shocks, and it will lead to habituation. And the problem with the shock collar is that many parameters can modify the shock. So that means that the level of pain felt by the dog will be different. You, of course, have the shock intensity and duration, but you have also electrode size. On most collars, you have two sizes, one for small, one for larger dogs. And then something that is getting a little bit less controllable, the degree of humidity. And then you have individual factors like hair length, moisture level, skin, subcutaneous fat level. So this just means, I'm coming back to the beep warning just after, but this just means that let's say we can get the right intensity on the collar for one dog. That's already not very realistic, but let's say we can. If one day you have like rain, you will have to change the intensity. So for each dog, it's just not realistic to believe that you can get the right intensity. Meaning that when you use shock collars, shocks after shocks, you will get either too strong or too low intensities depending on the day you are using it. So we can already scratch the controllable part from the pro list. And about the beep warning, I made a slide just for that, because you will have many people that will tell you that they are not really using the e-collar by shocking the dog because they did it once, but now they will tell you, oh, it's just the beep, that's enough, my dog will stop. He's hearing the beep and it just stops barking. And something that I felt was that the dog is stopping, but he's experiencing fear, and it's like if he was getting shocked, and that's why he wouldn't exhibit the undesirable behavior. So I tried to find an explanation, and I think that's the one. What happens with classical conditioning is that, as you all know, you have unconditioned stimulus and an unconditioned response. So in this case, that's the food, and that the dog is salivating when he's seeing the food. Now, if you just start with a neutral stimulus like the bell or the beep warning, you have something that will happen with classical conditioning, being that the bell will become a conditioned stimulus and the dog will start to salivate even if he doesn't see the food. Then the food comes and it will act as reinforcement. Now, if we take the collar example, what is happening is exactly the same, just the stimulus is not the same. It's the shock that is acting instead of the food in this case. And the dog is experiencing fear and pain. Now, if you just use this famous beep warning, like the bell, what will happen is that the dog will hear it and experience the pain and fear response before even getting shocked. And if you take the food example and you think a little bit about it, you can manage to extinct the salivation behavior just by not giving the food anymore, because after a few tries, the dog will realize that the bell is not saying that the food is coming. But when something is really fearful or the shock is really high, you have classical conditioning that will never extinct, and that's the case, I think, for many dogs that got shocked. And even if you remove the actual shock, as long as the dog is answering to the beep only, it just means that he's experiencing fear and pain still. So if the dog is reacting to the warning sound alone, it just means that the classical conditioning is still in effect and extinction has not happened. He is actually experiencing heavy fear and pain. So that's smaller risk to the long-term welfare. Of course, it's maybe just one shock and then just beep warning, but I think it really doesn't make this pro-argument receivable. Now, what we found also in the working group was that you have a big risk of association with external stimuli. In everyday life situations, you have environmental stimuli, including the trainer. So that could be just a walker outside of the fence, and the dog is barking and will just think that he's getting shocked because of the walker or the dog outside or the child or whatever. And if you think a bit more about it, dogs are often barking because they have seen something. They not only bark for no reasons. So you have many chances to have something that is getting associated with the shock, which means that the perfect timing is required, else you can induce fear, aggression, and pain, and those behaviors will even become part of the dog's behavioral repertoire. So that's really something that happens a lot, I think, in everyday life use. You have, of course, a high risk of negative outcome if the trainer is unqualified. And as long as collars can be bought from the internet and everywhere very easily, you can't expect people to know really well how to use them. Now, about more general risk, you have, of course, physiological risk, like the rise in salivary cortisol and heart rate, which is getting a lot worse when the shock is unpredictable. You can have intense burn sensations that can lead to physical burn and skin necrosis. Even if you don't have skin necrosis, the dog is experiencing an intense burn sensation. You have stress-related behaviors, so that can be intense distress, but that can also be behaviors even outside of the training context, like yelping, like tongue flicking, like lowering of the tail position. And Schilder and van der Berg demonstrated that those behaviors will be seen even outside of the training field. They are even associated with the trainer. In the case of the real life, the trainer is just the owner, usually. And in general, when using any aversive-based method, that's not just papers about shock collars, but just aversive-based method, and comparing to positive training, what we can see is that risk of aggressions, fear, anxiety, and undesired behaviors increase a lot. And you have a decrease of the quality of the dog-owner relationship and, of course, a decrease of the dog welfare. You have also a decrease of the dog-human team performance. And we can really say that the dog welfare is at stake. So now that I told you already about all this, are we going to take all those risks? First rule when you are in a care process usually is primum non nocere. So if other alternatives exist, I'm thinking that even if they are not as efficient, maybe we should choose them. So about other alternatives, we have several standardized studies with qualified trainers that try to compare them. And if we check about both efficacy and welfare, what we can see is that in this first study, they found out that positive training was, as you can see, more efficient here. And then about welfare, they also see a difference. In this one, it's not just about shock collar, but just aversive methods in general. What they see is exactly the same. You have a better outcome using positive training and a better welfare as well. In this one, they find about the same efficacy, but a difference in welfare as well. And in the last one, this study was about fence collars, and what they found out is that dogs that had a regular fence had less chances to go outside than dogs that were equipped with the electronic boundary fence collar. So that's not even a better efficacy. On the contrary, it's a lot worse. In this study, the numbers were like 40% chances to go outside with the collar and only about 23 when they had a regular fence. So we can scratch, as you can see, the fact that shock collars could solve behavioral issues that no other technique can. We just saw that we have other options that can do at least as efficient or even better. We can scratch the fact that shock collar is aversive enough to suppress an undesired behavior because, again, we have other techniques that can too. And about negative reinforcement, I told you earlier that I would come back on that. Some people will tell you that you can use shock collar by just shocking the dog with mild shocks, as they say, and you just maintain the shock until the dog is exhibiting the behavior that you want, and then you stop. So that's indeed negative reinforcement. But now with modern colors, most of them have a stop that will stop the shock after 10 seconds stop. So you can't really do that. And even if so, I made quite a lot of research on the topic, and I would say I never saw people reporting such use. So even if it does exist, it might be very rare. So it's hardly possible. And again, even if it's possible, we have other alternatives. So the list is becoming lower and lower. Now we have the cost. What to say about the cost? I have nothing much to say besides that it's just not a receivable argument all alone. You can't just say I'm shocking the dog because it's less costly. We just can't accept that. That's not a valid reason when welfare is at stake. So as you can see, we mainly have contra arguments, and that's not the end of the conference yet, but spoiler alert, we already can say no to shock collars thanks to the work of the ESVCA on the topic. Now I'm going to add a few more elements on this. I realized a paper on this one this year as well. Why did I do that? I had several objectives, and we worked to try to know the prevalence of e-collar use in France, because even if shock collar is a well-known subject, you don't have many numbers about that. And in France, I was under the impression that many people were using that. We wanted to know what were people doing in everyday life versus some idealistic conditions, because in the papers that I told you about earlier, often it's very well done studies with qualified trainers and with standardized conditions. So it's not how people actually use it in real life. And we wanted to see if there was a link between dog behavior and e-collar use. Also, we wanted to check if we could find differences between collar types, because you have a lot of papers on shock collars, but no one is actually trying to say if one is worse than the other, or at least I couldn't find any. So what we did was to establish a questionnaire, and all dog owners could answer. We spread it through social network and veterinary clinics, and we received 1,251 answers. So I'm just going to tell you a few things that we were able to gather in that. On the top left, you can see the abbreviations for each collar type. So about the prevalence, what we found, and I must say I'm quite not very happy of being French today, is that we had 26% of e-collar use in France if you gather all collar types. And even after a statistical correction, because we had more large dogs than small ones, you can say that it's 1 dog out of 5, which is very huge. Oh, the graph is not correct, but what it was showing is that for each collar type, you have some numbers, so it's lower than that. I'm sorry that we can't see that, but anyway. You have another study that was done by Blackwell and Casey in the UK, and here are the numbers that they got from their study. You can't see my number in France, but it's like around 10% instead of 1 and 12 for the RCC1. So it's just like 8 times more or something like that. So we found some associated factors to e-collar use. The first one was dog weight, meaning that larger dogs over 40 kilos had more chances to get shocked. Also, entire dogs. And then you have specific activities like hunting and security. So hunting, just so you have a precise idea, was about 70%. So 70% of the people that answered and that were practicing hunting were using shock collars on their dogs. And it was mainly the remote controlled one. So you can see things like that on the internet, like what is the new great shock collar for 2016. And for concerning the dog behavior, and that's only the owner point of view, we have a major cause of using shock collar, and what people report is that they are mainly using it because the dog is aggressive or the other thing is excitement. What we found out was that if they think the dog is fearful, they won't use shock collar. It's even a protective thing that the dog is fearful, but that's what owners report. And let's imagine a dog that is feared by unknown people. He would probably get aggressive at some point, at least he could. And this dog would then enter in the category of aggressive behavior. So we can't just rely on those answers. Now, about everyday life, a few interesting things that we could gather was that about advice before use, people answered that only 28% got advice. That means when buying the collar or before using it. They tried not many alternatives before using the collar. Like you can see, most of them tried less than 2. And they had many options in the questionnaire. They could say internet, advice from family, advice from my vet, advice from a trainer, etc., etc. So 2 was really low. And then about training methods, that's something interesting. Concerning the users of shock collars, they would tell you that they were using more aversive training than the non-users, which is quite logical. But now, half of them claim to use mostly non-aversive methods. So people shock their dog with e-collar, and then they tell you, well, my method to train my dog is mostly non-aversive, which makes us realize that they don't really get what they are doing to the dog, really. I think they don't realize that. Now, after use, you still have 58% that would recommend it. And if you question the public opinion, and I'm talking here about both users and non-users, and I find it quite scary, that number, because 43% of the people tell you that e-collar can solve issues that no other method can. So you have people telling you in the questionnaire, no, I would never use e-collar on my dog, really, I think it's not ethical, and for the welfare, no, I would never do that. But still, they tell you, but I think it can solve issues that no other method can. So I think we have a lot of communication work to do still. Now, about collar types. So for each collar type, we found the main reason for using it, and as you will see, it's quite logical. For the bark activated one, it's neighborhood complaints. So my graphs don't work well. It was just small numbers, but anyway. And for the electric boundary one, it's about runaway, which is again logical. You can see the graph again. I don't think they will work, but you have to believe me. And for the remote control one, it's about recall issue. So that's quite what we see, I mean, just when practicing. Now, about the efficacy estimated by owners, I think all the graph will be like that. I'm sorry for that, but it was working when we tried it first. So what this graph is showing you is that the efficacy is better for remote control collar. Again, that's what owners say. They say it's most efficient, and we only have 51% full success. For the bark activated one, it's the least efficient. And when I say full success, I'm talking about the fact that they can remove the collar and the behavior, the undesired behavior, isn't coming back. So that's what it's called full success.
I downloaded another version of your presentation. Maybe it worked better. Let me change.
Okay. Oh.
This is a PDF version of your presentation, so I guess that
okay.
Now figures will be all right.
Okay.
Better?
Yeah. So now you can see it. The efficacy estimated by Honor, I think it was quite, yes. If you can go back to the PowerPoint after, actually it's fine, because then I can scroll the things one by one. So on the graph you can see it. The efficacy is here better for the remote control one, and the lower is here. Now about physical burns, what we have in the study is that all collars together, you have 7% of dogs that get this kind of wounds. And for bark activated collar, you have close to 11%. Okay, can you go back now to the PowerPoint, please? Because I think I'm done with graphs.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, you're right.
Perfect. Okay. So to summarize the results about collar types, we have the bark activated one that is actually the most enduring. It's used on dogs demonstrating more undesirable behaviors. And when wearing this collar, dogs are described by the owners as sadder or calmer. And remember what I said about the beep warning is that I am pretty sure they are experiencing a lot of fear, even if they are not barking and even if they are not moving at all. Now for the electronic boundary fence, it's different. As you could see in the previous results concerning prevalence, it's far less used than the other collars, and it's only dependent on housing conditions, meaning that it's not because the dog is exhibiting some sort of undesirable behaviors or just is aggressive or whatever. It's just because the house doesn't have fences, and the dog behavior is not the cause of the use in this case. I'm not telling it's a good one, but if we want to make some differences, to me it's not the priority compared to bark activated one. And you don't find any correlation with disciplines. Now for the remote controlled collar, what we get is that it's used on dogs demonstrating more undesirable behaviors, like the bark one. You have more shocks reported by owners. That's only because when we ask them, of course, when they have the remote control in their hands, they can count how many times they did shock the dog. When the dog is wearing the bark collar 8 hours a day when they are not home, they will tell you, oh no, it's just the beep and I don't think he is ever getting shocked, but we have absolutely no way to know what is really happening. And it's highly correlated with disciplines. I told you earlier about the hunting, and hunting was the highest number of all. Now, if we want to compare what we found in this questionnaire compared to idealistic conditions, what I called idealistic conditions is from those 3 studies where there was a clear protocol with no external stimuli. That's the first thing. In our study, of course, it's real life, so it's many external stimuli. In the idealistic conditions, you have a perfect timing because they used qualified trainers to run the test. And in our study, of course, you have possible bad timing. In the good conditions, if I can say so, you have very few shocks. Usually it's 2, 3, under 10, I would even say under 5. And you have inconsistent shocks in our study. Now the results, which are of course a consequence of that, is that they can have up to 90% of efficacy in perfect conditions of shock use, whereas we have barely 50%. They reported no physical burns, and in our French study we had 7% physical burns. So, in conclusion, what we can say is that for the ESVCA review and position statement, when checking the current scientific evidence available, the PRO can be easily invalidated and contra are heavy and numerous. For our French survey, we have theoretical idealistic conditions that are very different from the real-life reports, and the balance in favor of contra is bigger than demonstrated before, so that's just even more arguments. And we can also say that all collars are not equal, and again, I'm not defending electronic boundary fence collars, not at all, but I'm just saying that some are even worse. In conclusion, I think it's just not acceptable to shock a dog in 2018, and we should really work to be able to check the underlying cause of the problem. Of course, I am speaking, and I am speaking, I think, for all the ESVCAs. That was the conclusion of our position statement, that a ban is very needed as long as people can buy those collars so easily. That's really hard to communicate and explain all this to them. So, of course, no shock collars. And something I would like to add is that we have to be kind with owners that are coming to us reporting the use of such collars. They are not professionals, they are not qualified trainers, that's not their job. And pointing fingers, I think, is useless. I met a lot of people doing those studies that use shock collars, and honestly, when I started to explain to them all the risks that there was for their dogs, they were not so happy to use it. I mean, people don't use that saying, oh cool, I'm going to shock my dog, that's really nice. No, that's not this at all. And most people, when they realize what they are doing, actually don't want to do that anymore. So we have to explain to convince, not force them. And a quote that I liked a lot from Karen Overall: in all situations where shock has been used, there is some damage done, even if we cannot easily see it. So yes, I really do believe so. And that's all for the conference, and thanks a lot for your attention. I would like to give a special thanks to David for the organization, which was very smooth, and of course to all the colleagues that helped me for those papers, especially ESVCA members, and that's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Sylvia, for your nice presentation. Really interesting. And now we have time for questioning.
Yes, of course, for the PDF you can have it. You have also I think the text along with it. So yes, you can have all that, no problem at all.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Maybe a few questions, no?
Well, people is typing. So.
Yeah, I'm reading just one question. The slide was saying that behavioral issues can only be solved by electronic collars. So it's just what people that are pro for the use of collars tell you. I mean, it's what people tell you, but I think I demonstrated that it's not true actually. So, yeah. But as you saw, 43% of the people that answered the French study still believe that, even those that don't use it on their dogs. So I think people just think, it's like I'm against violence, but sometimes it can help, or you can hear people say things like that. I'm not saying it's true, of course. Known side effects in the nervous system. That's a difficult one. I don't have a precise answer to give you about that, but when you are seeing like learned helplessness, you have experiences on rats that tell you it comes from the adrenergic system. And I remember one that you have rats getting shocked, so they have norepinephrine going down for 48 hours, and if you wait this time, then the learned helplessness won't happen. So I think you have a lot of neurotransmitters that are implied when the shock happens, and it's not directly the nervous system, or maybe not the answer that you were expecting, but I would say it's a lot about neurotransmitters. So someone is saying, the most I explain, the most they need to deny the facts. I'm not sure I understand that. I think it's Sylvia de la Vega who said that. I don't think I understand you. Or I'm not sure I understand what you want to say. You said, I find a lot of cognitive distortions between e-collars users. So the most I explain, the most they need to deny the facts. Well, I don't know. Since I made those studies, I really take time to explain. Yeah. It's hard for people to admit they have hurt their dog. Well, I don't know. I really try to have a non-judging approach. Sometimes when I see people being uncomfortable, I even say, I did that to my dog. It's not true, but it's like, okay, I'm not judging you. And I tell them it's okay if you did it, you didn't have the information, now we can try and work and do without it. Would you agree on that? And then, I don't know, it's going quite fine, but I understand what you want to say. I don't try to make them admit that they hurt their dog. I just say, okay, it's the past, we are working on the future, we are working to make your dog behavior better, and let's forget about the past. What's done is done, and well, we have to work with what we got. I mean, I can't go back into the past and unshock your dog, so that's over. That's what I wanted to say when I was saying no judgment, etc. Even if I'm not too happy when I hear that, of course. More questions? Oh yes, that's interesting. So Carol told us about the ban in the England, Scotland, and Wales. And yes, if you ask me what would be okay is just a complete ban everywhere. And I even think that as long as we have the internet that is so easy for buying colors, one government can't do much. So that's why in the ESVC we asked for a European ban, and that would be nice. But I agree with you that a partial ban would maybe not be enough. Maybe if people have a long way before buying it and have to meet some professional trainer, etc., maybe it would help. But anyway, if you're a good professional and a good trainer and a qualified trainer, I don't see how you need to use it, because, well, I'm working with many trainers that never use it, and I don't think they have problems more than people who do use it. So Elizabeth tells us now about Ireland. Yeah, about the EBF. Yeah. Yes. Yes, I agree, Elizabeth. And it's funny because this morning I was talking to a veterinary friend who told me that he was trying, I don't know if it's all Europe, it's a French collar, I think it's called Winect. So it's not a shock collar, it's something with a GPS system to know where your pet is. And you have some microphone on it, so you can talk to the dog, and you have some beep on it as well. And he used shock collar for his dog. He was not too proud to tell me that, but well, he did. And he said, now that I used it, I see what it does and I will never use it again. But anyway, he did. And his dog just started to shake when she heard the Winect beep. And he was telling me she had exactly the same postures and fear postures than when she got shocked. So it's what you said, even, and it was the electronic Boundary one. So yes, I agree with that, Elizabeth. EBF is electronic boundary fence, so that's the one you put on the dog with some invisible fence, and he can't cross outside of the area. Usually you have to get flags to signal the dog where the invisible fence is, and some major issues that come from those collars is that people not always use the flags, so that's a really misuse of it, and it leads to big damages. Other studies on the use of e-collars, well, why not? I'm not against it, but you know that you can do many questionnaires, but studies using shock collars, it's just not possible, and you have ethical issues as well, but I'm not against doing more about shock collars. Yes, Joke Monteni. So you are a good professional trainer and you never use shock collars. Maybe you are not French. Also in France, we have many trainers who use it, and trainer or professional trainer, you have no law about that. So about anyone can say he's a professional trainer. You know, that's maybe why I'm saying that. And yes, of course, for Boundary learned with positive reinforcement, it's better. Anyway, my idea, and I think that's what you heard, is that you can do everything with positive reinforcement even better than with shocks. So, of course, you should never use shock. Yeah, in Belgium, okay. I missed one. Do you feel that the usage? No, I don't feel it's increasing. I think, but that's just my personal opinion. That it might be just wrong, but I feel that it's going better. It's too slow in my opinion, but I think with positive training and communication increasing about welfare of dogs, we are getting there, but I'm just scared it will take 20 years. I would like it to be 1 year, but it's just very slow. Okay, one question from Sarah. Most owners whose dogs had collar wounds kept using the collar after that. Actually, I would say it's half. Some people kept using it after, yes. It's not, some people didn't get scared by that. Yeah, it's too slow. But no difference between if they are shocked. I don't know about a study for joke questions. They didn't look at the difference this way. So no, they just compared in the recent study about electronic boundary fences. They just compared dogs with one or the other system, but they didn't try it like you would like to. And again, I think you have ethical issues to start building a protocol where dogs will get shocked. It's not so easy. Okay, I don't think I missed other questions.